really brings me to the issue of policy. I was talking with somebody and he said, you guys operate under the Act of 1885. And he says, this was set up by the British. And when the British set up acts and laws, they had three things in mind. Said, one, you distrust the population. Two, therefore you control the population. And three, you exclude the citizens. And that was the whole policy of colonialism. So we shouldn't be surprised that those things continue to linger as hallmarks of the acts under which we operate. Distrust of the profit motive of companies, and therefore we need a great deal of control. So we will constantly be looking for issues of national security. Not that they're unimportant, but sometimes these things take on strange avatars when we start talking about it in a policy construct, and you can see it when we are talking about net neutrality and these matters, right? And we try and exclude. So when you talk to the government about multi-stakeholder, they look at you as if you have three heads. And this seems to be a new phenomenon that seems to innovate government. And so government, now talks about having multi-stakeholder. And thank you. I think they have made significant improvements. So this leads to the next point we're saying is that we do need to update our policy configurations. And from the telecom side, one of the things that needs to be looked at is the convergence bill from a policy perspective that the government has been talking about. And this was mooted in the last BJP government and didn't go anywhere. But I think it's time again to revisit and to move and to get it done, especially since the majority is there. This is an important aspect of where we need to move. So in the whole policy area, I think that needs to happen, because I think we are continuing to work in silos. And one of our conference panels yesterday, this point was brought up again and again with regard to how we operate. We need to get away and understand the reality that unless we break down these silos and start working in a converged means, that we are continuing to be facing gridlock. So that's the first thing. Second thing, in terms of regulation. So hopefully policy, and we need to keep these sequences right, because sometimes we change the sequence and then we get into trouble. Regulation must also always follow policy, and must be the means by which policy is effectuated and implemented. And sometimes in our regulatory environment, we see the cart before the horse. We see sometimes the regulator trying to make policy and the policy maker trying to do regulation. And so we need to sort of keep those guidelines. And in the regulatory environment, one of the things that we need to increasingly see is understand what the cost benefit of some of these regulatory proposals are. There's any number of proposals that have come. Let me just give you a recent one. Mobile number portability for India. We started off with state-level mobile number portability. We spent over 500 crore rupees on this. And then we said, let's just go, now that we've done this, let's go to mobile number portability for the nation. By the way, let me just sort of contextualize this. Never, ever, in any other part of the world has mobile number portability been done with 365 mobile switching centers, 550 BTSs, 2 MNP providers in a real live network that is functional, with over 750, it's about 750 to 800 million connections at that particular point. Nowhere else in the world. And we did it thanks to the engineering capabilities of this country, this nation, the DOT, and the private operators. We did it. Now, when you think about mobile number portability for the nation, there's 2% of the total population that perceives that perhaps will probably benefit of this. So I think an example of saying is that, are we willing to do this much attention diversion when there are so many other things to begin to do something, spend this type of money, roil our networks, and get to do something which has such a minimal impact? So I think an example of where we need to continuously look at regulatory initiatives that are subject to a cost-benefit analysis in terms of going forward. And I think that's one of the points. Now, let me just, again, pick up the third point that we talked about, which is the private nature of the involvement. And since from COI we represent most of the operators, private and associate members at also private companies, one of the things that you have to understand is what is the magnitude of this thing that we are looking for. Let's just start off with some data points. What is broadband today? 512 kilobits per second. Already I see smiles on lots of faces. That's exactly right. It doesn't even pass what we used to call the giggle test. All right, and where are we supposed to get? 2 megabits per second. Guys, do the math. Do you know what that means in terms of spectrum? To get from 512 kbps to 2 megabits for every person that is under policy to be connected, which is the 1.2 billion people of this great country of India. And where are we? All right, we try and scoot by with 15 to 18 megahertz of spectrum, where the rest of the world, every operator has upwards of 50 megahertz of spectrum given to them in perpetuity without any continual, nibbling at license fees and spectrum usage charges. You pay upfront, go for it. And I think we need to address this whole issue of what are we trying to do in terms of involvement of private partners in this. Now, the government has clearly understood that the government does not have the resources to aggregate this type of resources. And what is the resources? By the government's own estimates. In the last 5-year plan, the 12th 5-year plan, 950,000 crore rupees is the outlay just for telecom initiatives outlined by the DOT and the government, of which 90% is supposed to come from private resources. If you look at the Digital India initiative, and not all of it, just most of it, smart cities included, it is supposed to cost over 113,000 crore rupees. So you do the math again and you say, if 90% of all of this is going to have to come from private resources, the health of the private sector is absolutely critical and key. Now, people obviously say, you guys, keep on looking at your industry. Let me just say this one corollary and data point, and please live with this. Our operators and our businesses do not become successful unless we are maniacally focused on our customer. And this is one thing that we've done very successfully in terms of our voice revolution that we've introduced. We've stayed focused on the consumer in terms of affordability, in terms of reach. And now we're faced with a conundrum. What's the quality of our network come to? All right, so therefore, the financial health of the industry is absolutely imperative. And you ask yourself, what's the rate of return on this industry? On average, 1% return on investment. Yeah, it's the law of averages. Somebody gets 10, somebody gets minus X. So we get an average. You would have done better by keeping your money in a checking account than you would have done in investing. How are we going to attract foreign investments and domestic investments? Now, the Honorable Prime Minister has done a very good job in terms of at least escalating the foreign profile of this country so that at least sovereign debt rating issues at least are now addressed. Because it's important we raise a lot of foreign debt. That's a good thing. But we still need to continue to say the economic development of this country is keenly tied up with the telecom sector for obvious reasons. We contribute about 3 to 4% of the GDP. So the financial health of this industry is absolutely essential in terms of policy decisions and regulatory initiatives. And let me just close with right away. People talk about drop calls. And I'm constantly in various forums where people keep throwing this in our face. Let me ask you, it's not by way of excuse. We recognize that there's a problem, by the way. So we know that. Every one of us faces this. So what happened? 2 things happened. The introduction of what we call refarming. Which business in its right mind will invest 1 red cent in the business if they are told that at the end of a 2-year period, their businesses would be at risk? You would not be able to get your license back. There was no question that you'd get your license back. There was no assurance of this. If you got it, hey, good luck. That's one. 2, there's this inordinate scare in terms of being able to locate our towers. Why? Because people say, I love great coverage, but please don't put a cell tower in my backyard. And we face increasingly pressure every day. Please take down this tower. Please take down that tower. Somebody's complaining, I've got headaches, I can't sleep. In spite of the government adopting one of the strictest safety norms in the country. We've got to come to grips with these things. And right away, both in terms of fiber and in terms of our cell towers. Again, just close with this data point. We have approximately 600,000 towers in this country. Incrementally, we needed 100,000 towers. We were able to put up 36,000 towers. All right, so the other point that we talk about is the fragmentation of our spectrum. All right, if we want to produce 3G and 4G, we need 5 megahertz of contiguous spectrum. Increasingly, our spectrum is fragmented. So things like spectrum trading, sharing, those are the needs of the hour. So some of these things are things that we need to look at as we move forward. So with that and time, I hand back to Balaji.
Thank you so much, Rajan. I'll pick up on a couple of threads that you left out there for discussion, but maybe jump a little bit to Sanjay yourself or to Manoj. I think rural India and the challenges, something that chairperson for the session talked about was on power, whether it's conventional or renewable. How does that strike you as a potential roadblock towards rollout of broadband networks and services to rural India?
So I think, to be honest, I think that's a whole different industry that step in and do the job. But what we could do from a technology standpoint is bring in a technology that's not that power hungry. I think I can tell you electronics every year is reducing 100% in size and it's doubling in efficiency. I think we are very well on that track. Second piece that we bring into the fold is what we call network virtualization and cloud. I think what that means is if you look at current technology networks and architectures, they are hardware-based, they're monolithic. To cover India, you need to have a lot of gear out there on the ground. You need to have data centers backing them so you can collect all the data. So what we are offering is technology. Of course, it has to happen step by step because a lot of these technology assets are staying in their balance sheet. So first, we bring in technology where you can reduce the cost of production drastically. I mean, we're talking about reducing it up to 100% down. So the second challenge is how do you now bring in business models that can create motivation for operators to, while you're modernizing, where you're bringing in new technology to the fold, we're also giving them a treatment of their balance sheet. I think, to be honest, we're out there, we're promoting what we call outcome-based models. So as I said, we're one jig in this puzzle. I think we're trying to come into the fold and working with service providers to create motivation and impetus to do that. So, because I think that is one thing you have to fix because affordability is going to be an issue all over there. And the second piece is the digital literacy. Even if government does a fantastic job, I think I'm really overwhelmed seeing what has happened in last 6 months from a hybrid standpoint. I think you still need to go out there and train the people, make them digitally literate. Because at the end of the day, for me, Digital India is about access to the citizens. I think majority of them are there in the rural and probably more than half of them are illiterate. So giving them access to information, and which means bringing internet close to them. And the second piece is, of course, making it affordable, so they have the means to go and access it. So I think that's my thought. And one other point on the business models, to be honest, I think if you look at West or some of the countries, which we can set as role models, I think their governments came in, like we went with the railroad infrastructure. We laid it down. I think it's something similar has to happen. And I'm not saying government will cut it alone and the industry has to come to the fore. But we got to treat telecoms infrastructure as railroad infrastructure. You got to lay down and then build applications, build the digital literacy, bring in technology that makes it a model which is lowest in cost. So I think these 2-3 things will probably act as a catalyst to make it happen. That's my way.
Excellent points.
Just a quick rejoinder because Sanjay said all the points that I had written down, so I had to write down something more. Did you see my notes or what? Anyway, no. So he's the champion. He's the technology guru. He understands what we have done in our electronics, and obviously they are making it efficient every year. But just to cut over to a slightly different industry, which is the power industry, and with oil going down from $120 to 60, what it has thrown the world into a different spin is a different matter. But I think affordability of consumables has kind of gone up. It will itself give a little bit of fillip. The second thing is the focus on renewables. And we are lucky to be staying in a country which is 250 days in a year. 5 of our states have got what they call as electricity worthy sunlight. And these are the states which are slightly northern in nature currently. But that is where generation can get addressed. Not that there is a big yawning gap between what we require at peak load and what we generate. But I think there are enough and more measures that have been taken. The second 2 points are actually key. The first is distribution. Do we have enough efficient distribution mechanisms for power? And I think that is where a lot of work probably needs to be done. And the last one, where there are strides of technology that are happening, is about storage of power, which is in terms of what is your battery technology? Is it sustainable? And battery technology nowadays, while we use it only as far as the handset is involved, but I can tell you there are people innovating battery technologies which are at a home level. So if you see Mr. Elon Musk's launch of the Tesla power bank in the US, it claims that one particular power bank, which has got a patented technology of battery, can actually store power which is enough for the whole week, let's say, after it is charged in a particular way. So there are strides that the world is making on storage technologies of power. And I think these are all antidotes that we will have to utilize very smartly to make sure that we are trying to use this second scarce resource on this planet on power. So I think to underline this, all this needs to be sustainable. And we've already heard from our Honorable Prime Minister on the zero defect, zero effect. It is mandatory to maintain that kind of vision because you cannot keep on depleting the planet of these natural resources. Hence, the onus lies on engineers like us to try and keep on innovating and supplying it back to consumers as well as businesses so that it is judiciously used.
Thank you, Manoj. I just want to pick up something that you brought up, and I think ma'am as well brought up on the multi-stakeholder engagement and maybe a little discussion on that. Are we seeing things ease up in the last year or year and a half in terms of the way ease of business is kind of on the ground improving, or is that a threat? And if so, what are the 2 or 3 things that will help us from not becoming, a balkanized India, which is 29 states versus one country kind of a thing? Because obviously each of you represents from the industry, IT player who's been in multiple states working with governments, whether it's Ericsson or, of course, Rajan from the operator side. You obviously bring that rich experience of working on the field. What would be 2 or 3 things that you believe, if there's a prescription that we need to recommend to the government, as this is a FICCI DOT kind of a seminar, that we would talk about? And second is, what do we believe as private sector we can take a role, which is kind of not saying, hey, government, you got to do what you got to do, which is what ma'am was saying, but that we are willing to step up in 2 or 3 dimensions to allow for on the ground ease of execution. Those 2 dimensions, I think, would be quite useful to in the context of access.
Just some examples of this issue. I think one of the realities we have to keep in mind is that, for good or ill, our states are becoming a lot more involved in policy decision and regulation and implementation realities. Right? Before, we had a planning commission which doled out resources, so there was a strong tie between the center and the state governments. Now that has been broken, so what replaces it is still, being worked out, right? So I think this whole issue again of GST, this is again why we are seeing GST sort of having this thing of passing. But again, this whole issue of the states basically taking more responsibility. Obviously, land use is a state issue. right-of-way is a state issue. Implementation for a lot of the projects are state issues. So I think for a simple thing like right-of-way on our fiber and of our towers, we find that the same problems that we used to have at the center are now being exactly replicated at the state level. So previously in the center, we used to have multiple agencies that we'd have to knock. You wanted spectrum clearance, you knocked on wireless planning. You want clearance for environment, you knocked on environment. You want clearance for finance, you knocked on. And then there was this realization, guys, if you want to continue to progress, you need one window clearance. Now you go to the states and they're just learning this lesson that hey, listen, we need a single point of clearance. So that's the first point that we are working with in a lot of our issues. Hey, guys, give us this single point of clearance. Don't let us run from pillar to post. That's the first thing. The second thing that we are also seeing is that central government decisions are not being communicated. I think Mr. Sundarajan pointed to this issue of having a meeting. And I mean, that's a fantastic initiative. And I think we need to see more of that. Again, take this issue of safety norms on EMF. I'm surprised at the local government ignorance on these matters. These are people who are supposed to be implementing, who are supposed to take their cue from the central government, who have heard the minister making statements in the Rajya Sabha and the Lok Sabha, and have complete ignorance in terms of what the requirements are and do things absolutely contrary to what the central government is. So this ability of the central government to work more closely in terms of agencies and government-to-government relationships is a key area. Now, obviously, from the industry perspective, our contribution is to say, look, how do we work in that networked environment? So I think that is one of the key things that we are looking forward to.
I think maybe you can just dwell a little bit on the EMF thing, which I thought was a very good success story. Maybe a bit on that to the audience and for just a refresh for the rest of us here.
Yeah, so one of the things that we started off with is 2008 Government of India came out with the safety norms on electromagnetic fields, and that was the World Health Organization, a subsidiary entity called ICNAP, that set this for global standards. The Government of India looked around and said, look, we don't have any standards in India. Let's adopt best in class in terms of global standards, and that's what they did. That was 2008. Subsequent to that, there was a lot of hue and cry. This is not good enough for India, blah, blah, blah. So the government, without any scientific background, but just because they wanted to appease the outcry from the citizenry, decided that they were going to reduce it by 90%. So the EMF norms that are adopted globally were reduced by 90%, 1/10. And those became the new norms in 2011. And so we had to reconfigure our networks as a result of this lower density power that is required. So, things happen in our networks as a result. So we said, fine, if that's what it takes to get the citizenry comfortable. Now, unfortunately, what happens is that the citizens are still concerned. And this notion that the government of India has adopted one of the most stringent safety norms doesn't seem to have percolated, and the central government doesn't have taken much of an initiative in communicating this. They said, hey, look, the industry should be doing it. The industry, we try and do it. People tell us, yeah, we don't put a whole lot of faith in the industry because you guys obviously have a vested interest. And so no matter how much effort we put, we still don't seem to be able to make much headway. So what happens? So increasingly, we are almost on a daily basis, and this is no exaggeration, right? There is some court case going on. 3 and 4 major high courts, when the PILs have come in, have opined that there is no proven health hazard in this matter if the safety norms are held. Kerala High Court, Tamil Nadu High Court, Gujarat High Court, and a panel of the Rajasthan High Court, the Allahabad bench of the High Court. Clear, Honorable Prime Minister, Honorable Minister of IT has made public statements in the Rajya Sabha in response to questions saying that the safety norms in India are some of the best in the world. 93% of the countries of the world have norms that are less stringent than those we have in India. And yet, we have this problem. And so, as a result, drop calls become, the problem du jour.
But I think I wanted to, probe you a little bit more. There were some successes that you've got in terms of multi-stakeholder engagement. I just thought if you could put that, because that would be a good illustration for all of us here.
So one of the things,
in terms of what you did with term sale, government and local initiatives, road shows that you've done in the last couple of years.
So thank you. So for one of the things that has worked very well is the central government, first of all, calling all of the states and saying, hey, look, and here's the guidelines for tar construction, cell tar construction. All right. So that was the norm. All the state governments, the secretaries were brought in, and then the central government secretary wrote to all the state government secretaries and saying, please be aware, this is the norms, this is the guidelines, please adopt this. So this is something that we were able to use with the state governments to be able to initiate it. So that is a big success. The second thing is that we had, as from the industry itself, went out and did our own research and basically said, listen, what's the issue? And so we identified 4 areas that we felt were key influence points. The medical community, because they needed to be educated and become influencers. The academic community, because they were the ones who understood the physics of it. The third is the media, because we were seeing all kinds of, alarmist reporting as a result of people not understanding what is going on. So we had to educate that. The RWA, which is the Resident Welfare Associations, those that owned or represented ownership of real estate. And then moving forward in terms of the government at the central level, in terms of aggregating and moving forward in terms of media presentations, TV presentations, and all of that. We've had considerable success in terms of working with the local governments. Kerala government is a great example. They were one of the first to take to heart the central guidelines. They then took these guidelines, passed it on to the things, formed a one window where, as a result of the High Court ruling in Kerala, they gave police protection for our folks when they were assaulted going to do regular maintenance